Good morning, fellow students. So we're going to begin with a little meditation in prelude to our Mind and Mental Factors class, as we usually do. So relax your body. I'm telling myself this all the time. Relax your mind. Remind yourself you don't have to think of anything else. And once you've recognized your respiration, place the mindfulness on the respiration in front. Mental factor mindfulness, keeping in mind the respiration. One of the points of this is to let go of other, we say in Tibetan, we say namdok, which doesn't mean, dokpa means conceptualization, but namdok means ideation, other thoughts. So as you deprive those thoughts that might be arising of your attention, but placing all your attention on the breathing, they're starved off. They begin to diminish in intensity and frequency. If you've had some success in that, turn your attention now to the nature of your mental consciousness. Everything that we experience is noticed by the mental consciousness. Here we're letting go even of our attention to the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body consciousnesses, like withdrawing your attention to your heart chakra, like the limbs of a turtle being withdrawn within its shell. See if you can recall the memory consciousness, remembering consciousness of the clear light nature of the mind. If not, reinstall an apprehension of it by noticing the thoughts are not permanent. They are not obscured by the mind. They're not like a grain of rice falling through some warm honey, sort of slowed down or impeded. This is our conventional clear light nature of the mind. Also called the developmental Buddha nature. If we apply the mental factor, joyous effort, enthusiasm, zeal, whatever you'd like to call it, we can develop all of the positive qualities. And with shame, embarrassment, and conscientiousness, and the three roots of virtue, we can eliminate the negative activities of the mind. We can completely transform who we thought we were. We can overcome our limitations, our thoughts of our limitations, recognizing that we can develop care for other beings as much as we care for ourselves. Simply because we're exactly equal with them. And there is no inherently existent I that takes precedence in my own consciousness. I could just as well designate I to the entirety of sentient beings with their aggregates. Which is wise because they have been kind to us in numberless lives in the past, as our mothers, as our friends, as strangers, even as enemies. They've been kind. They're exactly equal with us in wanting to be free of suffering, wanting to be happy. And our ability to think like this logically is a result of our having, at the moment, a life of leisure and endowment that the Buddha mentioned in so many sutras. How rare it is, how valuable it is in making use of this transient opportunity. If we were to die now, we might find ourselves reborn in the hell realms, or as a hungry ghost, preta, or an animal. Where even the word dharma is never heard, let alone mind and mental factors, or the stages of the path, or the Buddha Dharma. Making a renewed motivation for this life of using the opportunity we have yet with this life of leisure and endowment to overcome our compulsive attraction to the appearances of this life alone, even beyond that, to feel a renunciation of all of cyclic existence. It's all of the nature of suffering, but it is capable of being overcome, of being transcended. We can liberate ourselves from this interminable suffering. One of the great aims that we could use with this perfect human rebirth. But even higher than that, recognizing that we can achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings who have been so kind to us, depthlessly kind. Revivify that motivation to use this life to develop the qualities of renunciation, bodhicitta, and the wisdom of emptiness that can lead us to the eventual goal of enlightenment, when we will be blissfully experiencing everything and in a position to extricate all of the sentient beings from the ocean of suffering and place them into that very same state. For that purpose, in order to better know the mind, I'm going to continue listening and analyzing, contemplating about the mind and mental factors. I'm going to participate in the class this morning with that end aim in mind, to achieve eventually enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And then bringing your attention back to the present. And we're missing a couple of our stalwarts, Lewis and others. It's so close to Thanksgiving. Does anyone know next Saturday, is the center meant to be having this class, or do you know, Doris?
Well, I was just looking. Yes, it is still scheduled. I know that there is some conversation about some adjustments because of Thanksgiving, but I think we're still scheduled.
Okay.
I just want to check in and see, what did you think about, like, next week is supposed to be last class. So do you think we'll be finished?
No, I think, what's his name? Venerable, who's the new spiritual coordinator, Dundrup had written me. I think we will go at least one more class after that. And if that, unless people have reached the point of no return in their ability to concentrate and attend. So, okay. So, any questions from before, from our previous class? Yeah, Nadine has a question.
I wonder if love and compassion are primary minds? Like bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is a primary mind.
Right. Love and compassion are found in the 11 virtuous mental factors, but and they are mental factors. They're not primary minds. The primary mind within which love and compassion are present, the primary mind becomes of the nature of love and compassion, but love and compassion are not primary minds by their own, they are mental factors by their own power. So I said they are among the 11 mental virtuous mental factors. Which virtuous mental factors are love and compassion? Stephen?
I would guess non-harm.
Non-harm is
Non-harmfulness.
what? Is that love or compassion or both?
I believe it's both. Since when we talk about virtuous mental factors, when we say something like non-harmfulness, it's actually the opposite or the opponent to non-harmfulness. So I would think love and compassion. Oh, hold on.
Okay. So you're looking at your list there, which is, Bob, do you know?
I'm looking at the sky.
Looking at this guy. Of the 11 mental factors, so non-harmfulness is generally considered to be compassion. Which of the others is considered to be love? Bob?
It must be non-hatred.
Yeah, non-hatred. So non-hatred, again, doesn't mean just the absence of hatred. It's something which precludes hatred from rising in your mind. And that is a sense of the well-being of others. So we mentioned in the lower class and in other contexts, if a person has developed compassion, they will have instances of love. If a person has developed love, simply by changing the orientation, that mind can become compassion. So they are like two sides of a coin, right? But love is particularly, from a Buddhist perspective, love is a state of mind that wishes others to be conjoined with happiness, wants others to be happy. Compassion is a mind that wants others, desires others to be free of suffering. So if you see a little child on the street that's crying, or in the airport has lost its mommy or something, one instant you want them to be happy, so you want to give them something, as long as you're not arrested by the airport police for molestation or something like that nowadays. And another moment, you want them to be free of their fear and their suffering. So they may alternate very much. So love and compassion are mental factors. Does that help, Nini? Thank
you so much. Yes, it helps. Thank you.
Wow. So we had gone through, I think, up to the very last one, but I just wanted to reiterate a little bit about joyous effort. There is a quotation here from Ayurvedia's Compendium of the Perfections on page 42 of the translation that I have. Consider a long day and night that spans the past and future limits of cyclic existence. This is a very famous quotation that Lama Tsongkhapa mentioned in the Lanrim Chemo from this praise by Aryasura. And I just wanted to read a little commentary on that verse from Geshe Sopa's commentary on the Lanrim. My screen looks like it's back. You could read it correctly? It shows properly on your screen? For some reason.
Yes, it does show properly.
Yeah, I don't know why. I guess there's something I can do on mine so it reverses.
It does that for everybody. That's just what it does.
Yeah, I think there's some little thing I can click somewhere to reverse.
I don't think you can. I think it's the way the camera's set up.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
you can. Yes, you can.
Yeah. Okay. So
And
I seem to remember somehow I did it once. So this is volume 3 of Geshe Sopa's commentary on the Lanrim Chemo, page 427, if you happen to have it or if you can find it. The Compendium of Perfections makes a similar point. In as many eons as there are drops of water in the ocean, eons in which years are composed of long, drawn out days and nights equal in duration, even to the temporal limits of cyclic existence. So a little bit different translation that CG had here. Actually, CG's translation is a little more precise. You produce supreme bodhicitta just once over this incredible length of time. Though you likewise have to accomplish every other collection, you do not become disheartened because of your compassion. Because of compassion being the motivating force that drives this kind of enthusiastic perseverance. And undiscouraged, you achieve supreme enlightenment. To generate this immeasurable, steadfast armor while disregarding your own suffering in cyclic existence is declared the first proper undertaking for the disciplined hero possessed of compassion. So to try to develop this armor to persevere, whatever happens. Many people who enter into Buddhism with enthusiasm for Tantra or some kind of thing lose energy over time. So this is very important. Geshe-la says, and his commentary actually corrects the mistranslation. They've used the translation from Joshua Cutler's Lanrim Chemo translation. He was the chairman of that group. But Geshe-la corrects it in his commentary. He makes it a little more precise. The unsurpassable armor of perseverance is similarly explained in the teachings of Akashimati Sutra. The time span from beginninglessness to the end of samsara. Beginningless, no beginning, beginningless time until the end of samsara. This time, the time span from beginninglessness to the end of samsara is so long, it is beyond calculation, obviously, right? Immeasurable. Nevertheless, imagine a single day lasts as long as that time period. You say, how could this be? Because that's as long as I will be in cyclic existence. But to develop enthusiastic perseverance, you have to imagine that period being just one day. Then 30 of those days together to make a month and use those months to make up a year, 12 of those months. Maybe if we practice for 100,000 of these years, we will be able to produce one moment of bodhicitta and be able to see a single Buddha. Maybe if we practice for as many hundreds of thousands of years as there are grains of sand on the banks of the Ganges River, these years made up of those days that are as long as our whole existence in cyclic existence, we will be able to completely comprehend the mind and behavior of one sentient being. So the aim of Bodhisattva, to be able to know the minds of sentient beings. We have to have tranquil abiding, clairvoyance that knows their minds and the means to lead them. Such an ability is important because to help someone without error, we must understand him or her. Just as physicians must know their patients' problems and the causes of the problems before they can treat their illnesses, bodhisattvas must know a sentient being's nature to be able to lead him or her to emancipation. Neither doctors nor bodhisattvas can successfully cure others just by giving them some expensive medicine and saying, eat this, read this book, read the Lanrim. That's all you have to do. We have to know their minds and be able to lead them. It takes a very, very long time to create enough merit to achieve the level of knowledge necessary to prescribe errorless spiritual medicine, that has no errors in it, to just one sentient being. It is therefore unthinkable how long a bodhisattva must practice to understand each and every sentient being. So if you're interested, you can check volume 3, page 427, 28, 29, commentary on that. I just wanted to bring that up because of these mental factors. Of course, many of them the virtuous mental factors are important in different ways, but enthusiasm, enthusiastic perseverance, joyous effort is especially important for us. It can bring some joy to the mind if you realize, even if I have to stay this long, I will continue to work for sentient beings. I'm in that long journey to achieve enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. So we talked about pliancy, mental and physical pliancy, but of the mental factors, it's only the mental pliancy that is a mental factor. We talked about conscientiousness, or as Bob suggests, heedfulness or carefulness. One of the important mental factors that we need all the time to keep our vows, to be conscientious. And equanimity, we talked about the equanimity here. This mental factor is not the equanimity between sentient beings, friends, enemies, and strangers. It's not the tangyom is the Tibetan word. It's not the equanimity of mind, which is neither suffering or pleasure, but it is a mental factor that is able to let go of any other alertness. Once you've reached the point where you don't have to exert effort to prevent your mind being scattered, let's say by excitement, or your mind sinking, through constant familiarization, you no longer have to expend effort in that, and to constantly be aware at that point whether those faults are present takes away from your actual achievement of tranquil abiding. So equanimity is said to be that mental factor. Then finally, the 11th mental factor here, non-harmfulness, ahimsa, or nampar mitsewa, as CG has put the Tibetan there, but not the Sanskrit. Regarding non-harmfulness, the Abhidharma Sammuccaya says, what is it? It is a mind of compassion and is involved with non-hatred. Remember, non-hatred is actually equivalent to love. So it is involved with that as they form, if one is present, the other will be there in the form of a potential. If you have love, you will be able to develop compassion, although some of them may be more, one aspect of those two may be more pronounced than the other. You may develop more. Of those two, love and compassion, what is said to be the more, which is said to be the most important, sort of the root of the Mahayana path? Does anyone know? Christine, you know?
Compassion.
Yeah, we always say compassion. We don't say love. Although if compassion is present, one wants to sentient beings to be happy. In many of the motivations for meditation, say in tantric sadhanas and other Lanrim sadhanas, says, may I become a Buddha in order to extricate sentient beings from the ocean of suffering. That would be compassion, right? And set them in the bliss of everlasting happiness. That would be love. So the two of them are kind of related. So it is a mind of compassion and is involved with non-hatred. It has the function of not inflicting injury, preventing one from harming others. As has been said above, non-harmfulness, ahimsa, is a patience, it's a type of patience that, lacking malice, observes sentient beings thinking, may they be free from that. May they be free from that suffering. This abandoning harm to sentient beings, or non-harmfulness, is the essence of the meaning of the Conqueror's scriptures. It is taught in sutras. Patience is the supreme austerity. The Buddha said, patience is supreme nirvana. An ordained person who harms or injures another is not a trainee in virtue. So even the conqueror's teachings in the context of bestowing a water strainer in the Vinaya procedural rite is a fine distinction of compassion. Does anyone know what that's talking about? Rowena, do you know what that's talking about?
Removing bugs from what you're going to drink? Or
Yeah,
all-
so it says, it talks about the Vinaya ceremony, procedural rite. So if one becomes a novice or a higher monk or nun, right? In the lay ceremony, there's no strainer involved. So if you have not become if you haven't attended a procedure, if you haven't read about it, you may not be aware. But at one point during the bestowing of the vows, pratimoksha vows of a monk or nun, one that the abbot gives one, or the abbot's assistant gives the trainee a water strainer, and reminds them that to be aware of when they are drinking water. Say, for instance, in olden days, maybe you wouldn't think of that. Now we still have strainers in our filters in our water, but we want to get out amoeba and other things, right? Or bad tastes. But in the time of earlier times, if there are bugs in the water and you drink that, small little insects, you could be causing harm to them. So the Buddha prescribed that the monastics, out of compassion, non-harmfulness, should filter their water. So that's the context of this. In the novice vows or the Gelong vows, one is given that water strainer to remind one of that. Since one must definitely turn away from harming others as well as their bases, the necessity of equipping oneself with a strainer for the sake of abandoning harm to creatures in water has been taught. And on the occasion of giving the instructions, one is cautioned about the necessity to abide in the 4 qualities that makes one a trainee in virtue. So this is sort of, you find in many, many contexts. So if one is criticized, you don't criticize back. This is a quality of trainees in virtue. Someone who's, you wouldn't say that, I wouldn't call myself a virtuous person, but I'm an aspiring trainee in virtue. I wouldn't even say I'm a trainee, I'm an aspiring trainee. Like, we're aspiring bodhisattvas, right? Until we develop bodhicitta, we're not actually bodhisattvas, but we're aspiring bodhisattvas who are aspiring trainees in virtue. So when criticized, or in other words, derided here, it says, do not, you don't lash back. Someone calls you, you're a jerk. You're a jerk. That's typical. There's one particular politician who, every time anyone said anything about him, I think you'll know who I mean, always said the same thing about the others. Even when one gets angry at one, you don't get angry in return. So if others are angry with you, you don't respond with anger. That's a sign of a trainee in virtue. Yeah, Rowena.
It's a basic playground training technique. Otherwise, you've got a lot of trouble. Sometimes it lasts, and sometimes they forget by the time they're teenagers.
Isn't it amazing what our moms and dads may have, or kindergarten teachers may have taught us, that it's congruent with the Buddhist path, right? When hit, do not hit back. If someone strikes you, you don't immediately strike them back. When one's faults are exposed, do not expose the faults of others. Do not expose others' faults. So these are what does it call it here? One is cautioned about the necessity to abide in the 4 qualities that are suitable for a trainee in virtue, that makes one a trainee in virtue. Therefore, the intelligent ones analyze and understand this well. They will be able to understand that abandoning harmfulness is the essence of the teachings. So as some of you pointed out, so the essence of the Mahayana teachings is compassion. I think His Holiness the Dalai Lama, sometimes there's a quotation that often say, the Dalai Lama says, "My religion is love, Have you heard that? Actually, it's sort of both. It's sort of love, it's both this love and compassion. That's the essential characteristics of the Mahayana trainee, as opposed to the Hinayana, which puts more emphasis on just achieving one's own liberation. So then, discussion of the category of virtuous mental factors. With regard to virtue, there are the 11 factors, mental factors, which have been explained. With regard to virtue, are the 11 mental factors here exhaustive? In response, in general, virtues are taught to be of 5 types. Virtues by way of entity, that means by their nature, those particular states of mind. Virtues by way of relation, by way of subsequent relation, by way of motivation, by way of ultimacy. So what does that mean? The 11 explained above, faith and so forth, are specified as being virtues by way of entity, because they are generated in the entity of virtue from their mere establishment without relying on other factors such as motivation. So you can have a virtuous state of mind at one point, even if virtues are not present at that moment, because you motivated, like we said at the beginning. That's why motivation is so important. Even if your mind wanders, you're making prostrations to the Buddha, and your mind wanders, you're thinking about your trip to the Bahamas or something like that, and you don't have a virtuous state of mind. Of course, if you're prostrating to the merit field, you're still creating some virtue. But if you've motivated beforehand, that action takes on a virtuous nature. So here we're talking about these mental factors, the 11 virtuous mental factors don't have to rely upon motivation at the beginning. They are by their very nature, if present in the mind, virtuous. Hence here I have indicated the 11 principal virtues. There are virtues by way of relation. Virtues by way of relation are minds and mental factors that are concomitant by way of the 5 similarities with the 11. So if faith is present in your mind, or carefulness, when we say conscientiousness is present, virtuous mental factor by their nature, then the primary mind becomes virtuous by means of relation with that, because it shares similarities with that. If there's wisdom in that there will be wisdom in that consciousness, that wisdom becomes virtuous, not by its own nature, but by fact that it's present in relationship to the virtuous mental factor, faith, and so forth. Virtues by way of subsequent relation are imprints of virtue. Virtues by way of motivation are, for instance, physical and verbal actions motivated by faith or motivated by other virtues, like we make our motivation at the beginning. All our listening, then, if we've created a positive motivation, all of that becomes virtuous by means of motivation. And virtues by way of ultimacy are explained to be thusness. What is thusness? Donnie, do you know what thusness is?
It's related to the Tathagata, gone beyond. It's related to gone beyond.
Yeah, you can say that. Thusness is another synonym for emptiness. So the Buddha referred to emptiness in various ways. Sometimes it's translated as suchness, thusness. It's the way it is, the absence of inherent existence. So virtues by way of ultimacy are explained to be emptiness, because all obscurations will be purified if one meditates within observation of thusness, of emptiness, ultimate truth. if one meditates within the observation of that, so you're observing, that's your object of observation. Even if you haven't realized it directly, you're meditating upon it. That's your object of observation. All observations will be purified to some degree. They won't be ceased if you haven't realized thusness or emptiness directly, but they will be pacified. They will be subdued during that period of time. Therefore, they are designated as virtues, but are not actual virtues. Okay, so emptiness is considered here to be an ultimate virtue, but it is not actually a virtue itself. Is that right? What do you think, Stephen? Is emptiness a virtue?
I don't believe so. Why I say that is, well, when you're in the state of meditating on emptiness, all conventionalities, that mind has stopped. And so you can neither generate virtue nor non-virtue. Is that way off?
If you're, what do you think, Bob? When you're meditating on emptiness, you're not creating virtue? Bob, what do you think? You're thinking?
Well, I tend to think of the non-virtues and virtues as being opposite. And certainly one of the kleshas is ignorance, and emptiness is a wisdom that opposes ignorance. Yeah. So in that sense, I would think that it would be a virtuous state of mind.
So meditating on it, well, I think it depends on the particular
or maybe the difference between emptiness and meditating on emptiness. Yeah, there might be a distinction there. Maybe emptiness is itself is sort of like more like an abstract quantity, right? Whereas when the meditation on emptiness is the actual wisdom,
right? So the actual action of meditating with the intention of eliminating the delusions and so forth. So I remember mentioning to you in the past in our tenets course, Lama Yeshe used to say, emptiness is nothing special. Even caca, excrement, has emptiness. It's very common. Everything is empty of inherent existence. What is really rare is the wisdom that realizes emptiness. So that wisdom that realizes emptiness, although the emptiness itself is not actual virtue, it's called here an ultimate virtue, the wisdom that realizes it is a virtuous state of mind. When virtues explained above are divided from the viewpoint of circumstances, there are 8 categories here. Virtue by way of attainment at birth, virtue by way of application. So remember, we talked about nature, nurture. So someone can have virtuous imprints in their mind from past lives because of familiarity with that, and can be more virtuous just at the time of birth. There's sort of what we say innate kind of virtue. Virtue by way of application is when you have to create the virtue by applying your mind now. Virtue by way of activity directed in front, by way of benefiting, by way of bearing, by way of acting as an antidote, by way of pacification. Virtue by way of concordant cause. So what does that mean? The first two, virtue by way of attainment at birth, is, for instance, the faith that arises through mere rebirth due to imprints from past lives without depending on familiarization in this lifetime. Not just faith, other virtuous factors. One can be compassionate, one can be loving. Some children, you've heard the story many times, the Dalai Lama mentions some children, when they see little ants on the ground, they're fearful that they might be stepped on, or they see little rabbits and they want them to be protected. Other kids want to throw stones at them because they are non-virtuous by nature. They, sort of innate kind of non-virtue. Virtue by way of application, for instance, is the generation of the wish to achieve Buddhahood in dependence on the 4 conditions. What are these 4 conditions? Relying on a spiritual guide, the spiritual friend, because very difficult to generate these a mind of bodhicitta unless you have a connection with a Mahayana spiritual friend, Kaliya Mitra, we say. Listening to the excellent doctrine, properly taking such to mind, contemplating it properly, practicing doctrines that are concordant with the attainment of nirvana. So this is talking about virtue by way of application. So whenever you you create virtue by applying your mind now, not just because of imprints in the past, this is the second kind of virtue. Virtue by way of activity directed in front is, for instance, actions of making prostrations and making offerings within observation of the special field of accumulation. So when one makes prostrations, if you can have, Doris, if you can get a tanka, you were talked about getting a mandala or something. If you have a tanka of the 35 confession Buddhas or the merit field, if you're making prostration in front of that, that supersedes your visualization. That is to say, if you don't have a tanka and you're trying to visualize that, if your visualization goes away, you no longer are creating virtue by way of activity directing in front, because your visualization has gone away. There's no tanka in front of you. You're just exercising. If you motivate it at the beginning, you'll still be creating virtue by the force of the motivation, but you won't have that extra virtue by means of the object in front. Fourth one, virtue by way of benefiting is, for instance, actions such as ripening sentient beings by way of the four means of gathering disciples. The four methods or four means of gathering disciples. Have you heard of that before? Donnie, you have a question? Have you heard of the before?
I've heard of those 4 ways, but also, okay, you showed us the book, The Steps on the Path to Enlightenment, and you mentioned the page numbers and volume. Was that volume 3, and what page number? I finally found it. That's what I've been doing, is looking for it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So that is volume 3, page 427, 28, 29, when Geshe-la is expanding on that, that quote from the Compendium of Perfections.
Okay.
So of the 4 means of assembling disciples, where does that come in? Who knows? Bob, do you know?
What do you mean by come in?
Where, yeah, this is a good question. What do I mean by where is it coming? In the Bodhisattva's practice, what significance do the 4 means of assembling disciples, what's the significance of that?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
So in order for a bodhisattva, proto-bodhisattva, to benefit sentient beings, they need to have, to do it thoroughly, they need to assemble an assembly of disciples, they collect an assembly of disciples, like Lama Tsongkhapa or, Geshe Zopa or Dalai Lama and so forth. The way to make disciples suitable, you assemble them. Here it talks about giving Dharma and material necessities to disciples. So the first thing that you do is that you are generous, so that people have a mind which is sympathetic toward you. Like, oh, Bob's, he'll give me a cup of coffee if I'm needed or something like that. The second one is speaking pleasantly. So when you are trying to assemble disciples, speaking in a way that is pleasant and makes you accessible to them. Third, applying the means of helping them to put into practice the teachings that you have given. So if you give advice to them, you help them put into practice the teachings that you have given. and acting in accordance or in harmony with what you taught. That you yourself, what do they say? Many people say, do as I say, don't do as I act, or something like that, kind of self-demeaning, like I'm telling you to be good, but you don't count on me because I might act crazily. The Bodhisattva in assembling disciples should act in accordance with their own teachings, right? So virtue by way, where do we say? Virtue by way of benefiting is, for instance, actions such as ripening sentient beings by way of the four means of gathering disciples. Then virtue by way of bearing is, for instance, special wholesome actions which act as the means for attaining high status and definite goodness. Bearing or holding. So what are the actions that act as the means for attaining high status and definite goodness? And what do those two words mean? What are high status and definite goodness? Anyone want to make it? How about Jennifer? Oh, Bob, I'll ask Jennifer first if she's there. Maybe she's off cultivating the garden or something. Jennifer, do you know what high status and definite goodness mean? Okay, maybe she's not there. Bob, you were going to make it.
Well, yeah, I mean the definite goodness means either liberation or enlightenment, so that you definitely are moving ahead. And probably high status, I would guess, would mean a higher rebirth in your next life.
Right. So when we talk about perfect human rebirth, or we talk about the aims of the Buddhist path, the first aim is high status, that is to create contaminated virtue that will propel you in future lives not to be born in the lower realms. Hopefully, if you have prayed also to be as a human, but at least as a god, where you can have some respite. The many of the benefactors of the Buddha who gave monasteries and food to the monks, their aim was to be born with high status in the future, even in this lifetime, to be rich and famous and so forth. People in future lifetimes to be born in that way is considered to be aiming for high status. But all of that will eventually end because it's all impermanent. So the more important sense of renunciation, not just renouncing the suffering of this lifetime to have high status in the future, but renouncing all of the sufferings of cyclic existence, even rebirth as a god and so forth, is aiming for definite goodness, which means, as Bob said, liberation and enlightenment. Bob?
I have a more general question about this whole section, actually.
Okay.
And that is, we seem to be using this word virtue in different senses. Because originally, when we started off, the focus of this chapter is virtuous mental factors. Right. So saying which factors are by their nature virtuous, as we've seen in this last little bit of commentary. But now it seems like we're talking about virtue more generally, like virtuous actions and things like that. Because one could distinguish, for example, between having a virtuous mind and one subsidiary question is, my understanding is that minds are either completely virtuous or not. In other words, if you have any single mental factor of virtue, it transforms the whole mind as being virtuous. So you can't have a half virtuous and half non-virtuous mind. But anyway, the more general question of it is here we're talking about virtuous actions, and so it seems to go beyond just having a virtuous mental factor.
Yeah, because you can have the mind can be virtuous by means of motivation. You've forgotten that motivation, but it's impelled you into doing this activity, so that whole activity becomes virtuous by stint of that motivation and so forth. When we talk about virtue, the Tibetan word is gewa. Like we say, gewa di nirdu dag, due to these virtues, may I, so forth. That refers to usually what we're talking about is virtuous actions. So due to these virtues, may I become a Buddha means that it's kind of like a dedication of the virtues that you've created, the virtuous karmic imprints that one is left in one's mind, which will definitely ripen, sometimes without choice. That's why we do the dedication. So those are called, virtue can refer to the virtuous karmas. It can refer to the virtuous states of mind. It can refer to the virtuous motivations that give rise to these virtuous karma. So generally, when we, before we've created the action, before we've created the karma, the tenor of the karma depends upon the state of mind. Now you can have a little bit different than what you're thinking, I believe. You can have states of mind which are not totally virtuous or not totally non-virtuous. We create actions which are called striped karma. That's it. I don't know how other ways it's translated. For instance, if you give money to the Red Cross, but your intention to do so is that your name will be on the honor roll or the newspaper, or you dedicate the new art center at the school with your name emblazoned on it and so forth. That's called mixed karma. You create some virtue by means of your generosity, and that will ripen, but that will be mixed. We say mixed karma or striped karma, like a rope where there's a red thread and a blue thread and a white thread together or something like that. They are inextricably mixed. So when you create mixed karma like that, in the future, the virtuous and non-virtuous elements of it will ripen together. So even if you have to, you're by the force of your negativities, you're going to create some negative thing. You can't stop yourself from stealing, or you really want to put the dig in someone and you can't stop yourself from criticizing them or something. You can at least try to mitigate that by creating some mixture with that karma. You're not completing the act, not feeling satisfied about it at the end, actually feeling regret while you're doing it, and so forth. That will mix in such a way that even you're criticized in the future, it won't be as devastating and as suffering on you. So there can be situations like that when you don't create pure virtue. Even our motivations are mixed with self-interest and so forth and so on. So until one gets higher on the stages of the path, I think our actions will be kind of a mixture. Okay, yeah, Bob.
So here you're talking about actions, but what about a mind itself? I mean, can you have, your mind has your mind with your mental factors. Can your mind be mixed, or?
Well, generally, when these 11 virtuous mental factors are present, there will not be present at that moment negative, the klesha, let's say negative states of mind. Not all kleshas are negative, but let's say non-virtuous states of mind. But they can alternate. You could have a moment, you're thinking, oh, I want to make this offering, and then are other people watching? It can alternate like that. So at any one moment, if there's a virtuous state of mind, it would preclude its corresponding non-virtue from being present. But there might be some close alternation, that may quickly, a negative state of mind might arise quite quickly after that. Stephen, you have a thought about that?
Well, yeah, and I find Bob's line of questioning very interesting. And what I'm thinking about is the situation in the mind of an ordinary person where pretty much everything has fundamental self-grasping to it.
Right.
And
So
so
again, no, self-grasping isn't necessarily non-virtuous.
I see.
So for instance, when we create contaminated virtue, we're grasping to a self. A person says, I'm creating virtuous karma. I will, be famous in the future. Or I will become Buddha or something like this. That's called contaminated virtue. So self-grasping isn't necessarily non-virtuous. You have to think about it a little bit, okay? Let me continue. So virtue by way of bearing, we just talked about where you're motivated, actions such as the means for attaining high status and definite goodness. Virtue by way of acting is an antidote. So remember the say detachment or non-attachment, non-hatred, non-ignorance, they act as antidotes to those. So for instance, virtuous actions that possess the special power to directly destroy the objects of abandonment and their discordant class. 7, virtue by way of pacification is explained to be, for instance, true cessations. Just as is said in a stanza of homage to the Dharma. Yeah, this is what, if you, there's a very famous verse that this is one, we talk about the quality of the Buddha, the quality of the Dharma, and the quality of the Sangha. This is the verse about the Dharma. Purity separating from attachment, virtue liberating from bad migrations, unique, ultimate, supreme, pacifying Dharma, I prostrate. So this usually the verse comes as I prostrate to the pacifying Dharma. That's the actual quality of the Dharma. Virtue by way of pacification is explained to be, for instance, true cessations, because true cessations are virtuous because they have eliminated all of the non-virtue, the non-virtues that they have ceased. And then virtue by way of concordant cause is, for instance, the 5 clairvoyances and the 10 powers that arise through the force of attaining true cessations. So I'm not sure here, the 5 clairvoyances can be achieved without achieving true cessations, but the 10 powers of the Buddha, I think that the phrase that arise through the force of attaining true cessations is connected to the second of those two things. The 5 clairvoyances, you don't have to have achieved true cessations, but for the 10 powers, the 10 powers of the Buddha. Do you know the 10 powers of the Buddha? Special powers that the Buddha has. They are achieved through the force of achieving true cessations. These virtues explained above are either actual or designated. Okay, so one little sentence there. There is a very big discussion I mentioned before in passing. In the Abhidharma, it says that not all of these virtuous states of mind are actual. What does that mean? Some of them are designated. So for instance, let's see, in the text about the 5 skandhas, it mentions that we are designating a state of mind, let's say, of detachment to the presence of certain mental factors And when those mental factors are present, that situation is designated as a virtuous state of mind, but it is not simply by its own essence a virtuous state of mind. It's only virtuous by dint of these other mental factors being present, like faith, conscientiousness, and so forth. I'll try to mention a little bit about that if we have time later, but as is mentioned, we're nearing the end of your patience and the time limits of the course. So let me just continue here. Discussion of non-virtues. So non-virtues by way of entity. So we're talking about certain of the klesha are non-virtuous by entity. Not all of the kleshas are non-virtuous, right? Do you agree? Delusions. Nadine, what do you think?
I think ignorance is also present in virtuous minds. And that's why it's not necessarily non-virtuous.
Right, right. Also grasping a true existence, wrong view of the transitory collection, and so forth. Non-virtues by way of entity, non-virtues by way of relation, by way of subsequent relation, by way of motivation, by way of ultimacy. You could connect that to the previous discussion. That's relatively easy to understand. Also, it appears that in regard to the non-virtues explained above, there are many distinctions to be made between actual and designated. And regarding their divisions and functions. When non-virtues are divided in terms of circumstances, there are non-virtues by way of attainment at birth, it's innate non-virtuous, and non-virtues by way of application when you actually create the non-virtue this lifetime. Non-virtues by way of activity and directed in front, by way of harming, by way of bearing, by way of discordant class, non-virtue by way of interference. The last one, non-virtue by way of interference is, for instance, bad views that interfere with all classes of virtue. So similarly, in regard to the unspecified, there are the divisions of unspecified by way of entity and so forth, up to the unspecified by way of concordant class. So what does unspecified mean? Doris, do you remember the word unspecified? Sometimes.
Is it unpredicted?
Yeah, just another way of translating lungmaten. Lungmaten means not indicated by the Buddha, you know, the lung, the teachings, that the scriptural citation. So the Buddhists didn't say it was virtuous or non-virtuous, it's sort of like neutral. So in regard to the unspecified, there are the divisions of the unspecified by way of entity and so forth. Moreover, there is much to be explained with regard to virtues and non-virtues, such as the aspect which appears to be virtue, but is not, and the aspect which appears to be non-virtue, but is not. However, I will not elaborate on them here. If you wish to understand them in detail, you should look at the Abhidharma texts, the Abhidharma Kosha and the Abhidharma Samuchaya, the main ones that we study. So when it says knowledge, that's actually CG's translation of Abhidharma, okay? So then there's a couple of intermediate verses, which I will not explain right now. And we get to the 6 root delusions, or 6 root afflictions, the 6 klesha, mula klesha. Mula means root, like in India, the Root Institute in Bodh Gaya is called mula. Sounds like the root, the fundamental, you know, the root of wisdom is mula prajna by Nagarjuna, sort of the root of wisdom. The 6 root of afflictions are attachment, anger, pride, ignorance, doubt, and afflicted views. Not necessarily, that's not always the order. Here it puts pride before ignorance, the attachment, anger, pride. These are sometimes elaborated. Afflicted views, there are 5 afflicted views that are kleshas, right? So how many would there be altogether then if you counted them separately? Stephen, you're good? Doris, yeah, okay. Your hands were sort of psychedelic there for a second, I couldn't see. So we sometimes say the 5 non-view klesha and the 5 view kleshas. The 5 kleshas that are views and the 5 kleshas that are non-views. The 5 kleshas that are non-views are the first 5 here: attachment, anger, pride, ignorance, and doubt. And the 5 kleshas that are views are the afflicted views, of which there are 5. Okay. So regarding the general definition, the general characteristic of afflictions, the Abhidharma Samuccaya says, the definition of an affliction, it's klesha, is a phenomena such that when it arises, the characteristic of being very unpeaceful arises. And due to its arising, the mental continuum arises as being very unpeaceful. One of my friends who studied at the dialectic school said that one of his teachers there used to say, when he was talking about peaceful here, it meant that the kleshas cause the mind to be unpeaceful. That meant, in this teacher's interpretation, it meant it prevented the mind from achieving nirvana, peace of nirvana. When we talk about Shiva or Shanti, that's talking about the peace of nirvana. But here, it's any kind of state of mind that causes your mind to become agitated from a peaceful state, or you're in a peaceful state, someone says to you something, your mind becomes unpeaceful, reacting to it. Maybe they say harsh words, they criticize you or something. Those states of mind that arise are called klesha, afflictions. So the afflictions are not necessarily not virtuous. Their main characteristic is that they cause the mind to become unpeaceful. Just as been said above, kleshas are awarenesses that cause the mental continuum to be very unpeaceful when they arise. The individual entities are as follow. So when we say entities, that means the defining characteristics or their natures. So attachment, duchak. When we had non-attachment or detachment, it was just the word chak, machak, or machakpa. Here it's duchak. Du means desire. Generally, you can have positive desires, and chak means sort of like means it's a kind of desire that is attached or has been defiled in some way. Regarding attachment, the Abhidharma Samuccaya says, what is attachment? It is the clinging of the 3 realms. It has the function of producing suffering. As said above, it is a mental factor that perceives a contaminated thing to be attracted by way of its own entity, and thereupon seeks it. It perceives a contaminated thing to be attracted by way of its own entity, by its own nature, not realizing that appearance to the mind of something being attractive is due to your karma. It thinks that it is actually attractive by way of its own nature, and therefore wants to get it. Or if it has got it, keep it. Attachment. Regarding this, the foremost omniscient one, Lama Tsongkhapa, says in his Lanrim Chemo, attachment observes an external or internal object. So, you can look or hear, observe. It doesn't mean only with the eyes, right? You can observe sounds or smells that are attractive, perfume or something, as opposed to going to the garbage dump. Or internal objects that, mental images within one's mind or one's ideas and so forth. Attachment observes an external or an internal object that is beautiful and attractive, and then becomes attached to it. For example, just as oil that has soaked into a piece of cloth is difficult to remove, likewise, attachment spreads on and adheres to its object of observation, making it difficult to tear oneself away from it. So the example I gave many times in the tenets course and other courses, in the restaurant, if you spill olive oil on the white cloth in the Italian restaurant, that's kind of like difficult to eliminate, right? You can't get rid of it easily because it soaks into the cloth. If you get angry, it's kind of similar to spilling salt and pepper on the cloth. Although it defiles the cloth there, the waiter can come by with the brush, the little brush, and they do that in the restaurants you go to, clean up that's gone, looks like new. So hatred has its own problems, anger has its own problems, but one of them is not this sinking into the mind. Of course, it can have a great durability, anger and hatred, but attachment by its very nature, because it's apprehending something that one finds pleasant, one wants to elongate that experience. So it's as though the mind sinks into the object, and if you have to separate from the object, it feels like your heart is broken, right? There's reluctance to separate from the object. Whereas in anger, generally, there's not so much reluctance to get rid of that anger as there is in attachment. Attachment is much longer lasting. So the evolution of anger, of attachment, is that we experience something, or we could say we observe something, which due to our karma is attractive. And as a result of that, the mind, the feeling that arises as a result of that attractive object is a pleasant feeling. Then what enters in is what's called inappropriate attention. Remember we talked about this, Sushin Mayimba Yiche. Inappropriate attention, thinking, wow, that's nice. Like I just had a milkshake in Marion the other day when I went for this radiation therapy. It was one of these thick shakes that you couldn't get through a straw. You had to eat it with a spoon. In North Carolina, they used to call them concrete. In Wisconsin, they call them concrete. Maybe you know those ones. And I had malt, because I like malted milk, put in, and Heath Bar chunks. Is anyone a fan of Heath Bar chunks? Anyway, you don't know. Do you know, Nadine? You have in Germany Heath Bar? Okay. I can't explain. It's just too good. You have to look it up on the web. So as I'm eating that, I'm thinking, oh, my God, oh, my Buddha, this is so good. And I think I'd gotten back to the hotel room and I was watching, at that point, I was watching some crime drama on the free TV in the hotel room, right? And the person was shooting up with heroin, and they're shooting up and they're going, ah. And I'm thinking, I'm exactly like that. This is attachment rising. The mind has, not seeing the defects in anything, just experiencing the mind, sinking into the object, wanting to elongate the time, hoping that the level of the concrete is not going down very much with each bite, wanting to elongate it. So we experience something due to our karma that's attractive. As a result of that, we experience pleasure. As a result of that, ordinary people who are not aware of the defects of cyclic existence engage in inappropriate attention, thinking, oh, this is good. This is wonderful. If I had this, I'll always be happy, and so forth. And as a result of that, the mind turns into full-fledged attachment. It sinks into the object and finds it difficult to extricate from it. If someone were to take that malted concrete with the Heath bar chunks in it away from me at that time, I would have held on to it. I wouldn't want to separate. Attachment is of three types: attachment of the desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. Worst of them is our attachment to the desire realm. If you develop tranquil abiding, you can separate from attachment to the desire realm. That doesn't mean that you ceased. The only way that you can cease attachment to the desire realm from the root, so that we'll never come back, is by realizing emptiness directly, right? True cessation. But you can temporarily suppress attachment to the desire realm by achieving tranquil abiding, shamatha. So your mind elevates to the form realm mind, which is free of the klesha of the desire realm, especially the attachment of the desire realm. For us, someone who's achieved that concentration, they might seem like an arhat. Even you offer them very attractive things. There's, while they don't have to be in the meditative equipoise, because they arise, there's still the attachment to the desire realm is suppressed for some time. They would seem to us like an arhat. They have no attachment to these things. The Abhidharma Kosha, the treasury of knowledge, divides them into two: attachment of the desire realm and attachment for cyclic existence. So even in the form and formless realms, there is a subtle kind of attachment that's different than the attachment to the desire realm objects. Abhidharma Kosha condenses the attachment of the two upper realms, the form and formless realms, into one, and takes them to be the attachment for cyclic existence. So that's a subtle kind of attachment that wants to, that feels reluctant to separate from, at the time of death, separate from a continuum of rebirth, right? When we talk about at the time of death, one of the clingings that arises is the clinging to a continuum of life. That's what ultimately propels us into taking rebirth. So that is present even in the form and formless realms. Even at the peak of cyclic existence, in the fourth formless absorption, there is still that subtle kind of clinging. That's why achieving those states are not amenable to liberating from cyclic existence. What does it say here? Because the two upper realms are referred to as cyclic existence in order to overcome the mistake of taking the meditative absorptions of the form and formless realms as a path to liberation. The function of attachment is specified as producing suffering. And the purpose for that is to make us understand that the root of all suffering within the three realms of cyclic existence is rebirth, which connects us to cyclic existence. And the principal cause for rebirth within cyclic existence is attachment, craving itself. Right? In the 12 links, what are we talking about? Who knows the 12 links by heart? Roanna, do you know? Christine? Can you know? Doris is our resident scholar this morning. Doris, what are the 12 links?
I'm going to try. No guarantees.
Okay. Oh, it's taking too long. Come on.
No, I can't.
Okay. Christine, do you know the 12 links? Bob? Rowena knows the 12 links.
Well, I can start off with ignorance. No,
Yeah.
ignorance.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
like
These are things we should know. Nadine, do you know the 12 links? Ignorance, karmic formations, consciousness. Consciousness means the consciousness upon which the seed of the karma has been placed, right? What comes next? Bob, do you know?
Is it name and form?
Name and form. That means a kind of rebirth as a result of that, within which that karma is going to ripen. Then what comes next?
Contact.
The 6 faculties,
Oh,
right? Then contact. What? Feeling.
mhm.
Then as a result of feeling, craving, grasping, becoming. And as a result of becoming, rebirth. And then the last one is death with or without contaminated aggregates. So craving, 8th one here, craving, grasping, becoming. So at the time of death, there is a kind of a craving for the continuation of life, an attachment to life that becomes grasping as we get closer to the time of death. And as a result of that, that creates a particular state of mind called becoming, which is the actualization of that karmic seed on our mind stream that will cause our next birth. You know, the maturation of that seed so that it's ready to become another rebirth. So if we can cease craving and grasping at the time of death, we could prevent rebirth. But the only way that you can eliminate that subtle kind of craving for continued existence is by realizing emptiness. So it's not something you can just decide, I'm not going to have any craving at the time of death. Even in the formless realm, when the person is about to die, there's that subtle clinging to existence. The function of attachment is specified as producing suffering for the purpose of making us understand that the root of all suffering within the 3 realms of cyclic existence is rebirth. This is from the sutra point of view, right? The root of all suffering is rebirth. If we don't take rebirth, there'll be no more suffering. Which connects us to cyclic existence and is the principal cause for rebirth within cyclic, and the principal cause for rebirth within cyclic existence is attachment, craving itself. So in the Pali tradition, in the Hinayana, the Theravada, they usually talk about tanha as the root of cyclic existence. Tanha means thirst, which is their way of translating craving here. So that's you haven't had enough of cyclic existence. You want to continue on. There's so much to be said about this. If we had more time, the antidotes to attachment and so forth, how we can actually do that. We have to overcome with proper attention rather than inappropriate attention. We should institute appropriate attention when we experience something pleasant. So with my concrete malted Heath bar drink, I should have been thinking, this is impermanent. This is not the source of real happiness. It's only the reducing of one suffering, replacing it with another. In fact, when I finished the whole thing, I had a little bit of indigestion because of the amount of lactose in the thing. You should use appropriate attention, remembering the fact that phenomena are impermanent, the nature of suffering, that they are comprised of parts, that there's nothing inherently beautiful there inherently, and overcome attachment that way. Second root delusion here, chondro, anger. So different than hatred, which was the shedang. Remember we talked about the difference between anger and hatred. Although there's not so much mentioned in the scriptures, the Dalai Lama has said, I sometimes get angry, but I never have hatred. You know, so hatred is like an intense kind of thing, a kind of anger in which there's also malice, wanting to get back, sort of holding that in the mind. Anger, what is anger? It is a malice towards sentient beings, suffering, and phenomena that are sources of suffering. It has the function of acting as a support for not abiding in contact and for misconduct. It has the function of acting as a support for not abiding in contact. It looks like there's some word missing there, right? Not abiding in contact. I don't have that text here.
Does that mean aversion or something like that, pushing away?
It has, I think there's a word missing. It has the function of acting as a support for non-abiding in contact. Well, let's say, leave out the word contact there. It has the function of acting as a support for misconduct, okay? When you get angry, you can easily engage in different kinds of misconduct, beating and abusing back and so forth. I'll have to check the Tibetan text to see what is missing there. The support for not abiding in contact with, I'm not sure what. As been said above, anger is a malice that upon observing the three objects of observation of anger, cannot tolerate them and wishes to harm them. The three objects of observation of anger are sentient beings, one's own suffering, and the sources from which these sufferings arise. So do you get angry? We usually think of getting angry at sentient beings. Do you get angry at suffering? What do you think? Nadine, what do you think? Do you ever get angry at suffering?
Yes, I think so, yes.
The mind becomes agitated. Oh, I can't stand this.
Yes, sounds
You know,
familiar.
wants to get rid of it, and sometimes will go to any means, immediate, reaching for the aspirin or whatever the pain reliever is. One gets angry at that, and the sources from which these sufferings arise. One gets angry at, the what do you call it? The coronavirus, or one gets angry at the stick that is beating one, and so forth. Like Shantideva says in the Patience chapter of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, one should realize that the stick is being wielded by a sentient being. You shouldn't get, there's no sense in getting angry at the stick. You should get angry at the sentient being. But then even the sentient being is under the influence of their anger. So you shouldn't get, who's beating you. So you shouldn't get angry at the sentient being. You should be angry with their anger, right? So, using appropriate attention as opposed to inappropriate attention. Regarding the teachings on the 9 bases of malice, the Precious Garland, text by Nagarjuna, says, harmful intent arises from 9 causes of intending to harm others, bearing senseless misgivings in the 3 times, with regard to oneself, one's friends, and one's enemies. So what does that mean? They harmed me. They're harming me. They harmed me in the past. They'll harm me in the future. Those are three, right? They're harming my friends. They harm my friends in the past. They'll harm them in the future. They're helping my enemies. They helped my enemies in the past. They'll help my enemies in the future. Right? Those are called the 9 causes. What is Trump doing right now? He's saying, we should, because these people who voted for the build plan or something like that, because they're helping the Democrats, they're objects of our anger, right? It's kind of an exemplification of that, right? They're helping they're helping our enemies. Of course, if you're talking about life and death situation, someone who gives support to the enemies, that's in legal jargon, that's a bad thing. Donnie, you have a thought?
What book are you reading right now? I can't figure out what book you're in.
I'm reading from on page 55 for our Mind and Mental Factors text.
Oh, right, the one I don't have. Okay, thank you.
Harmful intent arises from 9 causes, and I was just exemplifying what those 9 causes are. Bearing senseless misgivings in the 3 times, it means the past, present, and future with regard to oneself. So someone is harming me now, someone harmed me in the past, one will harm me in the future. Therefore, those are causes of anger. Someone's harmed my friends, my nation, my family, so forth. They did harm in the past, remembering grudges from the past and fear that they'll harm in the future. And then helping one's enemies in the present is a cause of anger. They've helped them in the past, they'll give support in the future. Those are called the 9 causes of anger. As been said in the Lanrim Chemo, the great exposition of the sages of Path, anger is malice, malicious state of mind, a harsh mind that observes sentient beings suffering and the sources of suffering, such as weapons and thorns, and intends to harm those objects. So one of my if I went to a psychologist, I'm sure there's something they would drag up is when my brother and I, we were kids, we were maybe 6 or 7 in the basement. My father was working, fixing the plumbing, and we had our squirt guns, these plastic squirt guns, and maybe they have big ones now, like bazookas. At that time, they're just handheld. And we're squirting, and they got some on my father, and he took the gun out of my hand and he smashed it with a hammer. So he was angry at me, but he was also angry at the implement that was causing him some discomfort, right? What it talks about, how can you be angry at weapons and thorns? Well, you've been angry at these things that your anger can exemplify and cause you to destroy them, to break them, and so forth. And of course, he's angry at us. I think we didn't call it grounding at that time. I think we got swatched with a belt. Anger is malice, a harsh mind that observes sentient beings suffering and the sources of suffering, such as weapons and thorns, and intends to harm those objects. Christine.
Oh, thank you, Venerable George. So I still don't get the difference between anger and hatred. I thought hatred had malice, but now we're talking about anger having malice.
Yeah.
So, what is hatred just a more intense form of anger, or are there definite characteristics you can talk about?
So anger doesn't necessarily, I'm not sure what she's translating as malice here. I have to look at the Tibetan text. Generally, hatred, in the scriptures itself, there's not so much differentiation between the two. But as the Dalai Lama has popularized, when we talk about anger and hatred is kind of like an intense form of anger that will, sort of has the intention of getting back. You hate something, So either you'd like to harm them or you'd be happy in those people that you hate when they experience suffering, right? You know, ha, he got what he deserved, you know, this sort of thing. You don't find that so much in the scriptures themselves. That's something that the Dalai Lama has mentioned to differentiate between a sort of a more intense form of hatred that has that malicious intention to harm others. It has the function of causing one not to abide in happiness. Where did I say that looked like there was something missing? What was that? Anger. It has the function of acting as a support for not abiding in contact, should be, with happiness and for misconduct. Here that you can see in this sentence here, it has the function of causing one not to abide in happiness in this lifetime. The more angry you are, and in future lives. So when we talk about the disadvantages of anger, if you want to try to overcome your anger, recognizing first of all how it causes your present existence, your present life to become unhappy. You know, when you're angry, it's very difficult to feel pleasure. While you're angry, when you're angry, other people who see you or come in contact with you are repelled. So you lose your respect, you lose friendships. It produces, what did we say here? Is the function of causing one not to abide in happiness in this lifetime and produces immeasurable suffering in future lifetimes. So the first thing to think about is how it affects you this lifetime. It causes your mind to become peaceful. It's a klesha. It's very difficult when you're angry, or if I were angry at that time, it would have been very difficult for me to enjoy my concrete malt Heath bar drink. You know, other things, even someone says, oh, here, you know, let me give you a massage, or let's do this, sing a song. You're angry. Your anger prevents you from being happy right now. It prevents your reputation. It diminishes your reputation. It causes you to lose friendships and so forth in the present. Has so many disadvantages in the present. But from the Buddhist point of view, the main problem with anger is that it creates the karmic seeds that will lead to suffering in incredible lifetimes in the future. Long periods of time in the hell realms and the animal realm as pretas and so forth, and leaves a continuity of innate behavior. Remember when we talked about the different kinds of kleshas that can be innate or through application, innate kind of behavior, natural behavior that will cause you to suffer in the future. So I think we found the word that's missing at the beginning there when it said in the definition, it has the function. What is anger? It is malice towards sentient beings, suffering, and phenomena that are sources of suffering. It has the function of acting as a support for not abiding in happiness and for misconduct. So that comes about here when we see it has the function of causing one not to abide in happiness in this lifetime and produces immeasurable suffering in future lives. In this vein, the Bodhisattva Charyavatara says, if one maintains a painful mind of hatred, it's painful for us, and it is painful for others. Mind does not experience peace. The mind does not experience peace, nor obtain joy and happiness. Sleep does not come, and there is no stability. So when you're really angry, it can even cause insomnia. The person who is angry saddens his friends, even if he gathers them with generosity. holding a party, giving things, he is not served. So talk about the servants who experience an angry master. He gives them salary and so forth, but they are, he's not served well by them. They might, what's the famous dish by the servant, spitting in the soup or something before you serve it to the angry master or something like that, right? In brief, joy does not exist in one where anger abides comfortably. So this is thinking about the immediate results of anger, how one's reputation, people don't want to be around you, it's cause for divorce, and so forth. In the Jataka Mala, the garland of birth stories, it says, due to the fire of anger, one colors unflatteringly, even adorned with, one colors unflatteringly. That means one becomes red, purple, even adorned with ornaments, one does not look good. So if you're angry, even you're dressed in your big red tie and, your face is red and your facial expression, one does not look good. Even though one may lie on a comfortable bed, one's mind suffers due to the agony of anger. Forgetful of the benefits one has enjoyed, tormented by anger, one proceeds on a bad path. One's reputation and achievements degenerate. Other people, one's reputation suffers as a result of being angry. You aren't able to achieve the goals of your profession or your path, whatever. Like the waning moon, one's glory fades. So, in Buddhism, talking about the waxing and waning moons. Waxing means getting bigger, waning means getting smaller, right? So, like the waning moons, one's glory fades. Although supported by friends, due to anger, one plummets senselessly into the abyss. One's contemplation of benefits and harm degenerates. One becomes erratic and confused. You can see this in some of our present political leaders who are getting so angry about things. Due to anger, one becomes habituated to misdeeds. So it becomes second nature to you. It's as though you meditate on them. And due to anger, one will experience suffering for hundreds of years in bad migrations. Well, hundreds of eons, even thousands of eons. Even an enemy who goes to great lengths to inflict great harm cannot manage more than this. Anger is our worst enemy in that regard. It creates the greatest, heavy negative karma. So between the two, what do you think? What's worse? Generally, people see anger as an enemy. We talk about anger management courses and movies, what was it called? Anger management or something like that. People see it because it has that effect of turning others off to you, your reputation goes down, and you create bad actions. Attachment is more difficult for us to recognize as problematic because it's experiencing something that's pleasant. It's only that when we don't get it or it's taken away, we can't elongate it, that we imagine the overt suffering. Attachment, between the two, which is the one that the Mahayana would see as the greater obstacle? Stephen, what do you think?
Attachment, Venerable George.
Attachment.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, part of why I say that, Venerable George, is because if you're all comfortable and happy, in the desire realm, you're not really tending towards spiritual practice.
Okay. What you, Nadine? Did you have a thought? Did you put your hand up?
I thought anger is more dangerous for bodhisattvas because because it harms love and compassion.
Yeah, that's usually what we think. Generally, between the two vehicles, let's say if we talk 2 or 3 vehicles, hearers, solitary realizers, and bodhisattva. Put it into 2, hearers and solitary realizers, Hinayana, Mahayana. So the Hinayana, the main obstacle is attachment. That's why in the Hinayana tradition, the main thing is renunciation, giving up all attachment, and so forth. That, however, is difficult to sustain for a long period of time, which is why in the Hinayana path, one has to achieve liberation within a certain number of lifetimes. Otherwise, the zeal, the renunciation loses because you're giving up any kind of pleasure. In the Mahayana, the more prominent of the 2 is anger and hate, anger, because as Nadine says, it is the antithetical to love and compassion. Okay. Anger is short-lived, can be short-lived, although it has repercussions in the future. So it, like the waiter using the brush to get off the spilled pepper and salt off the tabletop, whereas attachment is like the oil or the Tabasco sauce, the ketchup that you spilled. It sinks into the cloth, difficult to extricate. Yes, Stephen.
Well, thank you both for helping me out there. And I just wanted to ask about, we talk about wrathful deities, and they have a certain kind of, I guess you could say, aggressive energy. How is that different from anger?
Right. Well, in the exemplification of, Yamantaka or, Vajrapani or some wrathful deities or something, what they are exemplifying is anger at the self-cherishing thought. Like Shantideva says in the Bodhisattvacharya Vatara, if there is anything that one should be, would be, in any sense of the mind suitable to be angry at, is the self-cherishing thought, and self-grasping and so forth. So the wrathful deities are exemplifying, if you have that kind of energy, just say, generally in Tantra, we talk about it as the path that utilizes attachment into the path. Sometimes people say for certain individuals that have a lot of hostility and anger energy, that they can transmute that into the path through these wrathful deities by recognizing the source of their discomfort is ultimately the self-cherishing thought and self-grasping. But that's not generally we talk about Tantra as transforming attachment into the path. So we've reached just the end. I just want to mention here pride and doubt, not to go into detail right now. Where do we say doubt is, yeah, after that. So generally, when we think of the 6 root delusions, sometimes people think jealousy is one of the root delusions. That's a little bit of conflation with like some tantric teachings. When we talk about the delusions associated with the 5 aggregates, we talk about jealousy associated with one of the lower of the chakras and so forth. Here, jealousy is not one of the root delusions. Pride and afflicted doubt are, and also ignorance. And next time we'll talk about the rest of these, as well as the 5 afflicted views, the view of the transitory collection, and so forth. So I will expect, unless I hear from you, unless someone sends an email or messages, that we will have class next Saturday. If that becomes problematic for anyone and there's a decision made, let me know. But let's dedicate our merit at the end. We had the motivational, right? We had the motivation at the beginning, so something became, hopefully this whole session became virtuous by dint of that motivation. We tried to keep within the meditation, within the listening to the teaching, a virtuous state of mind. So we had both, the object in front, the merit field, the words of the Buddha keeping in front, and so forth. So we've created some virtuous karma, contaminated virtue at best, that will definitely ripen within cyclic existence. So to think, wishing, aspiring that this karma ripen in a particular way can help to direct it, like the pulling on the reins of a horse can direct the horse in the way that we want it to go. We pray that we wish that this karma not ripen simply in the experience of some transitory happiness in the future, but in whatever way it ripens, that it become the cause of our continued spiritual development. If we're wealthy, may we be generous. If we're attractive, may we be influential in leading others to virtue, and so forth. As a result of this virtue that we created, may we quickly realize the three principles of the path: renunciation, bodhicitta, the wisdom that realizes emptiness, and achieve through bodhicitta the wish to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And ultimately, as a result of these merits, may we become an enlightened being, and from that state, spontaneously and effortlessly enact the welfare of all sentient beings, taking them out of the ocean of suffering of cyclic existence and placing them into the everlasting bliss of enlightenment. Due to these merits, may we quickly become a Guru Buddha and lead every sentient being into that very same state. So thank you very much. Hope to see you again next Saturday. Keep well. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Venerable George.